Thank you for joining us today for our next segment of the Farmers Market educational series. Today, we're going to be talking about selling animal-based products at farmers markets. I am Jody Richmond, Extension Agent in Mercer County, and Alexandria Smith is our other co-presenter for today. All right, we're going to start out our presentation today talking about meat slaughter and processing. The first thing that we're going to look at is how meat sale and processing is regulated in the United States. It's currently regulated at 3 different levels, and how you intend to market and sell your product is going to determine which of these levels will most likely apply to you. The first thing that we need to think about is whether or not your product is going to be crossing state lines, either whether or not you need to send your animals across state line for slaughter, or if you are going to sell outside the state of West Virginia. If either of those 2 options apply to you, you really only have one option for how you're going to have your meat processed. And that is that it will need to be inspected and processed at a federally regulated facility or a USDA inspected facility. That's what that means. Federal facilities are inspected by the USDA. They, if your animal is inspected by USDA inspected facility and processed there, it can be sold across state lines. That is the requirement for animals to be sold across state lines or for meat to be sold across state lines. It has to be processed through USDA inspected facility. There are currently 7 slaughter facilities in West Virginia that are USDA inspected. If you're not going to be selling your meat products outside of the state of West Virginia, or you don't need to have your animal cross state lines in order to get to that facility, then you can go with a West Virginia Department of Ag inspected facility. There are currently 12 commercial slaughterhouses in West Virginia that are currently being inspected by the USDA. Now, if you go with this commercial slaughterhouse from USDA, then your meat can be sold commercially in the state of West Virginia. The next level is what we call a custom slaughterhouse. And a custom slaughterhouse, each individual animal is not inspected. That's the difference between a commercial slaughterhouse and a custom slaughterhouse. At a commercial slaughterhouse, there is actually an inspector present all day long, and they actually look at every single animal that goes down that line, and they're inspected. At a custom slaughterhouse, that doesn't happen. The slaughterhouse is inspected every so often, usually on a set schedule, and that they do not look at every animal that's processed. So that's the difference. At a commercial slaughterhouse, they make sure that every animal passes inspection, every animal is not sick, every animal meets the guidelines, and the facility meets the guidelines. At a custom slaughterhouse, that doesn't happen. They're inspected usually on a set schedule. Now, if you go with a custom slaughterhouse, your meat cannot be sold. That's normally considered an animal for home consumption. There is one minor exception to that that we'll get into in just a minute. Now, the third level that you may or may not have to comply with is your local health department regulations. Up until now, if you sold at a farmer's market, you were most likely also going to be regulated by your local health department. And the things that they were most interested in was how you were storing the meat, if it was at the proper temperature. Some of them would maybe require you to have a food handler's card, or they might inspect your facilities to make sure that your coolers and things like that were working properly, that everything you did was clean and sanitary. Now, we just recently had new legislation. It was just introduced in the late spring session of 2021. So there are going to be changes to whether or not the health department will have that control over things that are going on at the farmers market. And basically, the farmers market control has been completely taken under the West Virginia Department of Ag umbrella. That started last year, and it has moved even further there this year. We'll talk a little bit more about what changes are coming, but those will be taking effect July 1st of this year. All right, so let's go back and talk a little bit more about each one of these facilities again. Again, we mentioned the federally inspected meat facilities. So again, your meat must be slaughtered and processed through this USDA inspected facility if you're going to be crossing state lines. And that means whether or not, if the animal is crossing state lines, like before slaughter, it has to go to USDA facility, or if your meat will cross state lines in order to be sold. So if you're selling outside of the state of West Virginia, then you have to have it processed at a USDA inspected facility. Again, this process is completed under the direct supervision of the USDA meat inspector. And because that happens, it can be sold anywhere in the United States. Each of these processors are registered with the USDA and they're given a permit number. On this slide, you can see examples of the permits. The first two are inspection stamps for beef, goat, pork, and lamb. One of them is products, processed products, and one of them is just the raw meat product. And then, so these are just examples of what you might see on your package of meat when it comes back to you. Each individual processor will be issued a separate and distinct number. So you want to make sure that that is on your meat when you receive it. If you do not have a stamp on your meat products, then it is not legal for sale. So you want to make sure that they have properly stamped your meat products before you get it. Okay, now then the next level again is the USDA inspected, is the West Virginia Department of Ag inspected facilities. Those are inspected by West Virginia Department of Ag inspectors. And there are two levels there, of course. The commercial slaughter and processor, again, is going to actually inspect every single animal before it's slaughtered, and they make sure that the facilities are passing the inspection consistently as well. And they will have this West Virginia stamp on them down here that we have on the slide. And of course, you want to make sure that that is present on your meat as well, so it is legal for sale in the state of West Virginia. All right, so the custom slaughter or processing facility is the next level. And those, again, are considered for home consumption or your home and your guest, whoever's there to eat with you. You cannot sell those animals. The one exception is what we call a CSA exemption. You are able to sell shares of an animal and deliver it to the processor for that person. So you could sell half of a beef or a quarter of a beef or half of a hog to someone, and then you deliver it to the processor for that person. But the requirements for that are that those shares have to be sold before you take the animal in to be slaughtered. You can't take it there and say, oh, I'm going to sell this half of this animal. I just haven't done it yet. They have to already be contracted through with the person. So it's almost like that person is actually contracting with the processor themselves. You're just handling the delivery. All right, so this slide just shows you some of the different processing plants across the state of West Virginia. So this slide is available from the Department of Ag website. If you're interested and you would like to know what facilities are close to you, then this is the slide that will show you that. This is another version that is also available from the West Virginia Department of Ag website, and it is showing the West Virginia inspected commercial facilities. And again, each column will tell you what products, what types of animals and what things that they can do. So if you're specifically interested in somebody that will slaughter bison, you can come over here and you can look down the column and you can see who would handle that product for you. All right, so here's a slide that's going to tell you a little bit more about the local regulation or the health department, what they required up until July 1st of this year. Normally, local sales could be governed by your health department, and they're most interested in things like where the food is prepared, how it's sold and stored, and food regulations that are governed by your local food code. And they can enforce these codes up to a certain limit. And the things that they might require is a retail food permit. They might require an annual inspection of your facilities. They might require a food handler's card or safe serve certificate. Again, these could vary by county. Some health departments were fairly strict in enforcing requirements and saying what you had to have. Other counties were not as strict. So different counties might have different regulations of what they would require. Okay, again, that was up until July 1st. This spring, House Bill 2633 rolled around. Excuse me. And this bill is a very long bill. It was just introduced, and we don't know exactly what some of these changes are going to mean for farmers markets. These are some of the things that I pulled out that were clearly stated in there. So these are the things that we know are absolutely going to change. They changed the requirements of what vendors need a farmers market vendor permit. So if you applied last year, you might have needed a permit to say that you were growing produce. Vendors are required to obtain a farmers market vendor permit from the West Virginia Department of Ag, and it's basically telling them what they grow or what they're selling and what market they're selling at. Okay, so for this year, you don't need a vendor permit for, say, selling produce, but you do still need a vendor permit if you are selling meat and eggs and poultry and salsa and some of these processed products. We'll show you the form towards the end of this presentation. So basically, the bill just simply stated a little more clarification of who did and didn't need a vendor permit. They also authorized the department to establish the conditions and procedures to decide who needed the permits and to authorize the enforcement of the permits. Excuse me. They also require the permits are required to be displayed when you're vending, and they define terms related to farmers markets and cottage foods. They basically gave a little further definition on that. They clarified that farmers markets are no longer required to obtain a food establishment permit. So from the health department, farmers market vendors are no longer required to obtain a food establishment permit. They also said that any actions from the health department must be conducted in consultation with the West Virginia Department of Ag. And vendors are not required to contact the health department. So there's still a little bit of gray area there as far as the other products that vendors may or may not need, as far as inspection and things like that. It's not clearly saying that the Department of Ag won't require you to have an inspection now, but you're not required to contact the health department and set those things up. So you definitely don't need a food establishment permit, and you're not required to contact the health department. But there's still a little gray area. It didn't clearly say that you won't need all those different steps, but it did say that you will not need a food establishment permit and you do not need to contact the health department. It also provided a department to establish regulations for food sampling. It expanded permissible kitchens if you're doing non-potentially hazardous foods, and that will include farm, community, and commercial kitchens. And it also expanded the West Virginia Farm Fresh Food Act to include dairy and then some other foods. All right, this chart here just tells you a little bit more about some of the things that we said. It just broke them down in some visual term there. So if you're going to do a USDA inspected facility for your slaughtering and processing, you can sell it any way you want to. Hotels, restaurants across state lines, farmers markets, anything. If you're going to do a West Virginia Department of Ag licensed commercial facility, you can sell it any way you want to, except you can't cross state lines. All right, but then if you do the custom, you really can only do it as a household consumption, or you can do a CSA pre-slaughter sale, okay? And then we're going to talk here in a minute about on-farm poultry and rabbits. You can slaughter poultry and rabbits on farm, provided that you apply for an exemption and then you follow the rules. All right, home slaughter of other animals. Federal and state regulations do not permit you to slaughter other animals at home and then sell the meat products from them. You're not allowed to do that because they have to be inspected. Again, the exceptions here are poultry and rabbits can qualify for a home slaughter exemption, provided that you apply for the exemption and follow the rules. Right, here are some labeling requirements. Throughout this presentation, we have tried to use some of our West Virginia producers. So this is some pictures from Swift Level Meats. This is one of our Greenberg County producers. Now, the requirements at a farmer's market are not that strict. You're going to need the common name of the product, the weight of the product, and safe handling instructions. However, because you are selling your product, it's kind of a good idea to go ahead and follow the West Virginia Department of Ag or the USDA if you're crossing state lines labeling requirements. Because normally, if you work with your slaughterhouse processing facility, they often have a template that they're using, and they can print the label for you, perhaps for a small fee or whatever, and either add your logo or just add your address and contact information. So a lot of times they can have all this ready for you. You just have to plug your information in. And some of the information that you need to have is product name, the inspection legend, whether it's a West Virginia Department of Ag or USDA, the handling statement, the weight, the ingredient statement, address of producer and processor, and then nutrition facts and safe handling statement. All right, so this one goes back to, I'm just reminding you again of any licenses or documents required. When you access this presentation, I will tell you at the end some of the other documents that we have uploaded to the extension community. And one of those documents that we put together is a fact sheet that has clickable links that will take you to the applications for many of these forms. You can go on, if you don't want to access that fact sheet, you can of course go onto the Department of Ag website and search for these. They're all on there. Or you can go onto that form and it will have clickable links and it will take you there. Or you can go to Extension Community, and we've uploaded a lot of these files as well. Okay, so the first thing that you need to consider is if you're selling any kind of meat, whether it's poultry, rabbits, beef, pork, lamb, whatever, any kind of meat, you're going to be required from the West Virginia Department of Ag to have a meat distributor's license. It's a really simple form to fill out, and it's only $5, but you are required to pay for that and to submit that. If you're selling at a farmer's market, you need a farmer's market vendor permit sent to the Department of Ag. That's a $35 fee, and that is required for any of the meat sales as well. If you're doing poultry and you're slaughtering yourself, you need the poultry exemption. There's no fee for that, but you need to turn in that form. So same thing for rabbits. The rabbit exemption form is just a simple form you fill out and you send in. Of course, you also need to follow the guidelines for those as well. All right, the health department form, again, these may not be required after July 1st. You definitely don't need the retail food permit. The annual inspection fee was on a sliding scale based upon what your annual sales were. So if you sold under $7,499, it was a $35 fee, and the fee went up based on what your annual sales were. You also may have been required to have a food handler's card, or you may have been required to have a safe serve certificate. Again, there's a little gray area here because it does say that the health department should work in consultation with the Department of Ag. So we're not exactly sure what is and is not going to be required, but it definitely says that you do not need the food permit. All right, so we're going to talk about poultry slaughter. There is only one inspected poultry plant where an individual can take their birds to in the state of West Virginia. That's Martin's Meadow. Some producers in the state are taking their birds out of state to be slaughtered. If that's the situation, because you're crossing state lines, it has to be a USDA inspected facility. You can't have, say, a Pennsylvania Department of Ag's inspected facility. You can't do that. Because you're crossing state lines, it has to be a USDA inspected facility. If you would like to slaughter at home, there are two different types of poultry exemptions you can get. You can get one for 1,000 birds, or you can get one for 20,000 birds. And we'll talk about the difference just in a minute. This link here is one of the examples of the links that we've put in. And again, there's just a reminder that if you're crossing state lines, it must be USDA inspected. All right, the first exemption is for 1,000 birds. Again, you're going to need that meat distributor's license. You're going to need a farmer's market vendor permit if you're selling at a farmer's market. Some of the requirements are that you have to ensure the product is held in a cool sanitary environment. It is eligible for sale to individuals, restaurants, or to another distributor. It must be properly labeled with the producer's name and address, product weight, product name, the statement of the exemption, and it will have a number on there as well, safe handling instructions, the pack date, and record keeping. Record keeping for any of these products is a minimum of 2 years. Okay, so 2 years is the minimum record keeping. On the right here, we just have an example of a template for a poultry product. All right, so on the right here, we have an example of one of our West Virginia producers. This is Rainbow Farm in Summers County. This is just a pasture-raised poultry product, and in this case, we have a whole chicken that they have processed on farm. The second exemption that you can get is for 20,000 birds. So if 1,000 is not enough, you can apply for 20,000. You can process no more than 20,000 birds in 1 calendar year. You can have no more than 3,000 birds on your farm or your facility at one time. The labeling and processing requirements are the same for 20,000 as they are for 1,000. The record keeping is probably the only difference, is that they're going to be looking a little closer at your records because you are processing a lot more birds. Right, rabbit processing. It's a very similar process. You can process up to 20,000 rabbits in 1 calendar year. You need to fill out your rabbit exemption form. You must apply for a meat distributor's license, and your labeling requirements are fairly similar as well. Producer name and address, product name, weight, slaughter date, safe handling instructions, and you must keep those records for a minimum of 2 years from the slaughter packing date. All right, rabbit and poultry handling. Cool your product immediately in an ice slurry with a disinfectant, and it does specify in those documents what are acceptable disinfectants. You can hold your fresh product for up to 72 hours for sale. If you're going to have it longer than 72 hours, you must chill it to 40 degrees or below. You have to chill it to 42 degrees or below if you're going to keep it fresh. But if you're going to hold it longer than 72 hours, it must be frozen. All equipment must be sanitized. Again, they do document what appropriate sanitizers are. And it has to be kept at the frozen temperature. You can't let it thaw and then freeze it back. Okay, fish production. You can sell commercially raised fish at farmers markets, but you cannot sell wild caught fish. Raw products must be kept at 41 degrees or less. Fish must be gutted in an approved facility. Safe handling must be followed. And again, you are required to have a farmers market permit if you're selling at a farmers market. All right, so egg production. On the right, we have 2 samples of possible labels that you could use from the Department of Ag here. The 2 differences here, or the 1 difference in 2 examples, is the top one is using the Julian dating system and the bottom is using a normal dating system. Either of those is okay. We will give you information about the egg packet that you can obtain from the West Virginia Department of Ag. And one of the things that it has in there is a charting system if you would prefer to use the Julian dating system. A small producer can market up to 150 dozen eggs, their own production. You will need a small egg distributor permit. That is free, but you just have to file it from the Department of Ag. You also need the farmers market vendor permit if you're selling at a farmers market. That's a $35 fee. And when I say you need a farmers market vending permit, you don't need a separate permit for each one of these different products. So if you're selling poultry and you're also selling eggs, you just fill out one form and then you mark it with the different products. So it's not a separate fee every time. You just send in the form one time and mark it. That's an annual fee, but you only have to fill out one form. You can use recycled cartons if you cover the old label. The label must include the name and address of the producer, the date the eggs are packed, ungraded must be the largest thing on the label, and the eggs must be clean and fresh. And we'll define that, I think, on the next slide. All right, here is the examples of this label on a carton. And again, if you're using a recycled carton, you would label on top of the label that was there before, covering up the other name of the farm that it originally came from. This is the egg packet that you can contact the Department of Ag and you can receive this packet. We also have scanned in versions of all these documents in the extension community that you have access to when you register for this class. You can also receive this by email, or you can contact Deanna Grayley and she will mail it to you either way. All right, so let's go back and talk about egg handling and what a clean egg means. You may use a lightly soiled egg if you lightly sand it to remove small areas of dirt. Once it's been sanded, do not wash that egg. If you would prefer to wash it instead of sand it, you need to use a potable water source, and the water needs to be at least 20 degrees Fahrenheit warmer than the egg. So it needs to be at least 90 degrees Fahrenheit, and you can use an approved approved sanitizer. And down here is an example of one of the sanitizers that is acceptable. It's a bleach solution, and it tells you exactly what percentage it needs to be to make a 1 gallon solution of the wash. Now, when you do wash the eggs, you need to put them in a colander and rinse them. You cannot submerge the eggs. And then the eggs must be dried immediately afterwards. Shelf life of eggs is defined by the West Virginia Department of Ag as 30 to 40 days from laying if they are properly refrigerated the entire time. When you're selling them, they need to be kept in a cooler that, either you have an electricity source or a cigarette lighter, or you can use those sealed in like freezer packs, like the Igloo sealed packs, but you are not supposed to put them on ice because your eggs need to stay dry. All right, our last topic today is dairy production. As of 2019, we had 44 dairy farms in the state of West Virginia, and you can see them here on this map. There are lots of different dairy products that we can use. Pasteurized milk, cheese, and dairy products can be sold at farmers markets so long as the following criteria are met. Vendors have to have an approved processing plant that they're working with. Products must be pre-packaged. They have to be kept at the appropriate temperature in coolers, refrigerated vehicles, or freezers with calibrated thermometers. The vendor may need to have a food establishment permit, but again, that is changing as of July 1st. All right, so then we have labeling, and this label here is from Spring Gap Mountain Creamery. They have beautiful labels. They have several different products, and each product has a different scene on it. The container must state grade A or be approved by the West Virginia Department of Ag with the exempted dairy farm and processing rules. The common name of the hoofed mammal producing the milk must precede the name of the product when it's made from another milk besides cattle. So if it's like goat cheese, it needs to say goat cheese instead of cheese from goats. It needs to say goat cheese. It has to have the net quantity of the contents, an ingredient list in decreasing order of weight, allergens listed, and milk plant name and address and processing code of where it was processed. Now we get lots of questions about raw milk products. Aged cheese can be made from raw products if it was processed in an approved facility, if it's aged for at least 60 days at a temperature of 35 degrees or greater. The sale of raw milk for humans is prohibited under West Virginia regulations. Now, there are a couple changes in the July 2021 legislation that include the requirements for raw milk as commercial feed were added in. The classification requirements for dairy shares, like if you allow somebody to own a portion of, say, a dairy goat in order for getting part of that milk, that was spelled out exactly how you have to do that and how that is regulated for it to be allowed. One of those requirements was basically saying the language that you have to have in your contract about what that person has to understand raw milk means and what the risks may be in there for someone that consumes raw milk if they own a dairy share. All right, so the last part of this little section is just telling you some things that are available that are like the handouts that go with this section in the extension community. We have a lot of documents that we've added there to make things easy for you. Again, many of these documents are from the Department of Ag. They're forms and they're supplemental handouts and things. And you can certainly just go on their website and find those. But we did include them all in this packet so they would all be in one place if you want to access them. I did want to give you the one caveat is that some of these forms may change on a yearly basis. Things like the farmer's market registration form, that's going to, the vendor registration form is going to change every year. But if you need them now, we've put them all kind of in the same place so you can see them all at once. We also made a fact sheet that's a 13-page fact sheet that gives you a lot more information than what we were able to give you in this presentation. And that will be uploaded probably sometime this week. And it does have activated links that you can click on and go to some of these forms. That fact sheet is called Selling and Processing Meat, Poultry, Rabbits, and Eggs in West Virginia by Small Producers. So it will have those links in there. It's a very long document, but it does have that information. And it has some supplementary information in there as well. There's the egg producer packet from the West Virginia Department of Ag that includes a lot of things, including the application for small producers, egg distribution certificate, label guidelines and examples, the Julian calendar, and egg law and rules. This is the fact sheet that I just told you about. This is the first 2 pages of it. And like I said, it's just breaking down a lot of information that we don't have time to go into today. This is the meat distributors license. Like I said, it's a really easy form to fill out. It's just a $5 fee. It's just basically saying that you want to sell meat in West Virginia. This is the farmer's market vendor permit. Many of you are probably already familiar with it. And again, if you look at the section in the middle, this is what I was talking about. You don't need to fill out a separate permit for everything that you want to sell. You just check the boxes for what you want to sell. And then it's actually a 2-page form, so there is more information than this. But you're letting them know what you're going to sell and where you're going to sell it. This is the voluntary exemption for poultry. Again, you can fill it out for 1,000 birds or 20,000 birds. It just depends on what your annual needs are going to be. Very similar. This one's for rabbits. So that's about it. We did have one question about someone who was selling at their farm stand on their property. And the information that we've gotten is that they're basically treating that now as a farmer's market. Even if it's on your property or something like that, that will be treated legally as a farmer's market. So you will need to apply for the same permits and those exemptions that will all fall under the same rules as it would be as if you were selling at a farmer's market. But if you have any more questions, you can send them to us via email and we will try to respond to those. And we hope to see you next week. Thank you.